I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark Tyranny Edition. Hello!
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Arcane Mark. Today, in the spirit of the tyranny of GM tools winning our polls over and over again, we are going to be doing GM tools role-playing Tyrants. If you were one of the people who did the initial vote on this, you may have seen that initially it was called Role-Playing Tyrants and Other Rulers. But the Tyrants have taken over.
Yeah, well, you know what? The other rulers were there, and the Tyrant was like, we can share power, but then they seized entire control. Really, though, in many cases in TTRPG, now there are other kinds of rulers. They're like mayors and elected officials and other things like that. But many of the rulers in TTRPGs wind up being classic tyrants. There's also ones that aren't, and there you could have like constitutional monarchs or other people who are in power and have not seized the levers of power. But by the definition of tyrant, a tyrant is any ruler that is an absolute ruler who, through exercising their own power or gaining the support of certain factions, has basically seized control of like the normal system of government and installed themselves as the sole decision maker. That makes you a tyrant. Now, when that term was initially coined in ancient Greece, it was like, wasn't a good thing, but it was like maybe neutral, where it was like not necessarily like always bad in the way where you would name your lawful evil champion a tyrant.
Yeah.
At least at first. But the thing is that a lot of the tyrants went bad, or were bad, or it just didn't go well for them with tyrants. The few that managed to be popular and everyone liked them more or less, despite them being tyrants, installed a much less popular successor. And even at the beginning of tyrants, when you have people like Cleisthenes or the Corinthian tyrants, there are a lot of tyrants who had to go around with tons of mercenaries because power is how you stay as a tyrant. So in order to know how we're going to role play as a tyrant, we need to understand how your tyrant in your setting became a tyrant. What was the way they exercised power to seize absolute control? Because there's a big difference between a tyrant who is just like, yeah, they were just level 20, and then they walked into the town, and no one else in the town was higher than level 7, and no one could stop them. And a tyrant who seized control because they had the support of the church, let's say, or they
were part of like a family that had a large amount of political power and influence.
Or they were rich enough that they hired a huge mercenary army that was stronger than the standing army of the territory that they seized control of.
And that first one is an interesting one that you're only going to see in like a fantasy game. The idea that you have one person who could defeat entire armies by themselves is just absolutely absurd. I mean, you have things there like the Whispering Tyrant, with Tyrant in his name, is one of the most famous of the whole, like, I am a really powerful lich, and therefore...
Well,
of course, obviously he's got his armies and everything else, but like someone who is powerful enough that you can't, like, individually you would lose.
He literally has Tyrant in his name.
Yes.
Tyrant's Grasp. Here's another one that probably sounds like something that you could only see in fantasy is the tyrant comes in on a chariot led by a god who says, this tyrant is now in charge. Although that actually happened in Athens, although it was a fake, obviously.
Yes.
A fake Athena named Phae, according to Herodotus, the father of lies or history, depending on if you believe him. That's one of the things that Pisistratus did when he came back into Athens as tyrant. And that was part of getting popular appeal by using religion. And then, like, he played up that lie, he donated to temples of Athena, he supported, like, the games, the Greek Hellenic games, and he gave a lot of economic reforms that the populace liked, and people kind of liked him. His sons, not so much. But tyrants don't have to be, like, this I guess, like, chortlingly evil and just randomly mean and nasty to everyone, including their allies person, like Barzillai Thrune in Hell's Rebels, who's an excellent example of, like, a mustache-twirlingly evil tyrant.
Yes, well, let's talk a bit about that, though, because, like, one of the things that I think makes Barzillai's tyranny really work in the game is that you've got sort of the two levels of the tyranny. There's, like, the oppression that you, or multiple levels. You've got the oppression that people are experiencing that you're trying to rescue people from. You're trying to overthrow it. These openly, like, the severe consequences for any dissent, and, like, the prohibited behaviors like curfews and things like that. And then you have the things that are just like the flex, the exercise of power, that, like, no mint is allowed decrees, that's like, rules that are just, they don't, like, actually inconvenience you, but the fact that they're there is just like, wow, like, this person is arbitrarily banning things just to ban them.
Yes, this is like,
to make it feel different to live in that society in a way that's consistent. Like, so that would be like, particular codes of dress or particular things that remind people, hey, they're in a...
Yes, this is like the parodically stereotypical tyrant. It was like, when you look at, like, what would people think when they were being ruled by, like, the lawful evil champion tyrant, you would expect petty stuff like that.
Yeah, and this would be like, where you see, I mean, I tend to associate some of these things a little more with, like, the sci-fi dystopias and things like that. It's like, like, and everyone is wearing a white suit and you must all smile at all times or whatever. But, like, you can have these kinds of things in your fantasy games.
I remember that there was in Jade Regent, when you go to Hongal for a while, there's that one city, and then they make all the servants are smiling, and if they, like, cause any offense to the PCs, when they are probably executed, like, off screen, and then a new Judy comes in, and there is no war in Ba Sing Se.
Yes.
But tyrants in general, when you're role-playing one, they don't have to be as parodically over-the-top evil as a Barzillai Thrune.
They don't have to be the, like, execute anyone who does anything that looks slightly like it's being offensive to them, or type.
Even the ones that aren't as parodically evil with the mint ban and just, like, random arbitrary stuff as Barzillai Thrune often do hold on to power in a way that is brutal towards anyone who even remotely seems like they are like, a challenging their authority or a threat to their power. Because they know that unless they were, like, the child of a tyrant, they know they became a tyrant through means such as going and finding factions, gathering lots of money, taking political power, and in general, using that to take control. They know what it looks like if somebody else is doing that, and they're definitely going to ruthlessly crush.
And that means that showing strength is going to be very important for them, which is definitely going to come into play if you're role playing an interaction with them or just role playing the general way that they behave.
Yes. So let's talk about the different sources of power for a tyrant and what that means about that tyrant. So I'm going to start with the demagogue. A demagogue tyrant, everybody, or at least just enough to win a vote, likes this tyrant. They may not even have abolished the system of voting, but if the government has a system of checks and balances, they did abolish that. So that you vote them in, you vote in anyone. It could be someone that isn't them. And whoever wins that vote can just do whatever they want until the next vote, including changing the voting system. But they won't, because they know everyone likes them.
You might see some things like, yes, there's technically a voting system, but 99% of people voted for this person. And that's like,
Yes, in some cases where it seems to be democratic, but they rigged it. But some of these tyrants didn't even rig it. Maybe there's some sense of intimidation that people are a little afraid not to vote for them, but maybe there isn't, because this tyrant is a relatively brutal dictator to anyone who opposes them, but then has caused economic prosperity for their people. And all of their decisions mean that when it comes to your pocketbook issues, like, your family's doing better with this tyrant because maybe there was an oligarchy before that had a lot of money, and this tyrant has been, like, blatantly like executing like random oligarchs who, like, not for no reason, because they're usually corrupt at some level, and be like, well, I found this corrupt thing this oligarch was doing, because they all were doing corrupt things.
Yeah.
I've now seized their money, and I took 50% of it to run the government, and the other 50% is being distributed to everybody.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, there are policies that can be put into play where the majority benefits at the expense of the few who already had a lot of resources, that help the tyrant and the people, and can lead to people just legitimately being like, no, this tyrant is great. Those oligarchs kept taking all of our money. The tyrant is giving us a bunch of money, and the tyrant is conquering these other territories that were like a threat to us, and has created a strong army that is going to protect us, and we like this tyrant. Like, you can have a tyrant that has the will of the people, and you can also have one that kind of fakes it, or one that's like close, where they have to like probably like 48%, and then they cheat their way to 51. Like, there's a spectrum of that. It could even be progression of a tyrant who becomes slowly less popular, but just can't accept the reality that they've lost their popularity, and so they assume their enemies cheated the voting process, and they're just correcting it by putting their thumb on the scale. And the
tyrants are going to have, like, generally some kind of a scapegoat that is like, when there are problems, the problems are because of our enemies, whether those are, people in a different country, or like, a group or organization or type of person within their own country that then they scapegoat and blame and discriminate against.
It's traitors, or it's people who are different from us, or it's that other country's fault. Generally, a popular demagogue tyrant will use any explanation that they can think of. And even if that's obviously not the cause of the problems, and it's obviously caused by the tyrant's policies or actions, like, so if there's another country out there that, like, I don't know, is putting tariffs on this country, or like did anything, and then the economy goes down, it's like, well, it's those tariffs that did all of this.
Yeah.
We could all blame this country over there. Let's raise an army and attack them. And just try to deflect, make the bad things go to anyone else, and take credit for everything good that happens, regardless of if they were involved or not. So these are all the kind of actions of what I would call a demagogue tyrant, a tyrant who takes control because people actually want to install them, at least for the moment. Now, the next one I'm going to go with is the, like, ecclesiarch, who's using the church, religion, and belief system of the people in order to seize power from the government. So when you're role-playing one of these kind of tyrants, you want to think about the fact, are they cynically like Pisistratus in Athens, just like putting a woman and saying it's Athena to get power, or are they a true believer?
Yes.
They drank their own Kool-Aid, and they actually believe that their deity has sent them to do this, and in some cases, maybe their deity actually
did send them to do this.
It's like, hey, Bob, I want you to be the tyrant of this city.
Well, I mean,
it doesn't mean they don't necessarily have a good deity.
Yeah, but I mean, like, whether or not they literally received a message from the deity directly, I mean, they could be like a cleric or a champion of that deity who's like, yeah, I'm imposing the deity's standards on the people here.
Yes, absolutely. So you can have a spectrum from I just made this up, but I know people will buy this, all the way up to the deity told me to take control of this city, and there's a lot of leeway in between. Either way, what on the surface level of the tyrant, they're going to look fairly similar. They're going to be sermonizing and kind of, a little probably holier than thou towards their deity, although it depends on the deity's type. Like, if the trickster deity is the one who you're using, it's a little weird that you're...
Why is a trickster being a tyrant?
Why is your government, like, why did the people think that following the trickster deity is a good reason that you should be given power? Like, I'm not really sure, but for many of the types of deities that this would work for, which tend to be the more lawful ones who are like, follow follow the rule of law, follow the order of things like that, then you tend to be very sermonizing, and whether or not they actually believe it. If they actually believe it and they have divine powers or the mandate of deities, expect to see them show it off by performing miracles in front of people or smiting the non-believers literally. If they don't, then they might stage it using magic or using other kinds of magic in order to make it look like they do.
Also, you can expect in those kinds of things that the legal system is going to be entwined with particular beliefs and teachings of that deity as interpreted by that tyrant.
Yes, so, anathema of that deity that are normally just like, you really shouldn't do this, and we tell our priests not to do it. We'd like you to not do it and to think about it and come talk to us about it. If you're doing this thing, might go to, this is punishable by death.
Yes.
Or, if you want to add a touch of demagoguery, this is punishable by we seize your assets and give it to the church, which then donates it to charity to the people or something like that. We're also running a food kitchen. Mm-hmm. We don't have to be a tyrant who does even no matter what kind of tyrant you are, you probably do want to do something that appeals to other factions and the people to some level, or just have so much absolute power that you just cannot be shaken. Because a religious tyrant also somewhat is relying on public opinion if that's their only lever of power.
And that there's also the sense of, the even more powerful being that can come intercede if you interfere with this person.
Yes.
Which you have that also in like the Barzillai Throne, where it's like, it's a political power who is tied to an even greater political power.
Plus devils,
yeah.
Devils
exactly.
can come intercede. So when you're talking about that thing that you were transitioning us into, there is the tyrant who has a connection to some other powerful, like, political entity or figure. It's similar to the, could be similar to the religious one, except for that, especially in a fantasy setting where the deity and their servitors are real and they could show up.
Yes.
This is like the typical, like somebody, a big superpower installs their guy in some country and they're backing them. And so there's a lot of analogies. The main difference is that while the religion that is being followed by these, ecclesiarchs, tyrants usually is popular. It's a popular religion in the country. When you're supported by a foreign power, that's usually unpopular.
Yes.
And it usually means that you're actually a military tyrant. A military dictator tyrant who just has a huge number of mercenaries or some other army of your own that was powerful enough to overpower the army of the country itself and just seize control, essentially in a coup. Mm-hmm. And you can keep control also because of that. It doesn't matter whether anyone likes you. It doesn't matter whether they believe you have a divine mandate. It doesn't matter if they know you're in the pocket of a foreign government that they don't like. Because at the end of the day, you just have so much overwhelming military
And you
power.
have your force that's there, and then you also have the fact that, that you can call upon more reinforcements from other places.
Yes, from the superpower or whoever who installed you as the tyrant. That'll be even more overwhelming than the force that you already have. So these are the types of tyrants who rule by fear, and more in the sense that Machiavelli preferred to be feared than loved, although it can be good if you have both, since people who fear you won't turn against you immediately if something goes wrong. And so these tyrants also bear a similarity to the tyrants that are only in a fantasy setting, who just no, I'm just level 20 dudes, I'm gonna kill y'all. You have an army? That's great. I will kill the entire army if you don't make me the tyrant.
Yes.
And then some of the army's like, that's preposterous. We attack. Meteor Swarm.
Yes.
Or Horde Wilting actually has a very long range and doesn't hit anybody except the ones you want. So it's like, oh, look, all of your people are dead. Anybody else? And so this has some similarities to the fact that you are ruling by fear and your overwhelming force can be a threat that cause people to follow you. But it has some significant differences. For one, there's not this pending threat of another power that's backing you or your other military. Even if the tyrant didn't have another country backing them and just had a ton of mercenaries that they hired, or even just a bunch of military that they just like got, the military loves them and wants them to rule, and nobody else does, but the military does. If you kill the tyrant who has a huge military backing, one of their dudes from the military could just be the next tyrant, potentially.
Yeah, but if you kill the one who's like the level 20 person, then first of all, good luck with that. And second of all, then the whole house of cards falls down.
That's right. It's guaranteed that you're not just trading one tyrant for the next tyrant, so it makes that person a potential assassination target while also being a very difficult assassination target.
So they are still going to be looking to put defenses around themselves so that they're not constantly needing to tax all of their own resources.
The main problem for them is when they're asleep, because they can get ambushed and be at a significant disadvantage during the time.
So you can, so that's why like a lot of these types, you know, you sort of have like the classic like dungeon or wizard's tower or like ridiculously well defended place with like hideous traps around the place where they rest.
Yeah, exactly. And so these tyrants also, when they are exercising personal power, depending on what type of character they are, they might, especially if there's something like a spellcaster has daily resources, they might have to be actually very reticent about using their spells on a day-to-day basis because they need to hold them in reserve for shows of force or in case someone challenges their power.
There's a mention in chat about getting rings of sustenance to minimize sleep. Yeah, absolutely.
I was also thinking of rings of sustenance, Rico, because that keeps your sleep down.
Another thing you can do here for them is things like personal demi-planes that only they can enter and things like that.
Yes, or bound servitors that they created to basically give them something to keep watch.
Yes, that they can trust the loyalty of, absolutely. Because these tyrants really do need to worry more about the loyalty of their inner circle.
That's right. Or traps that they're hoping will stop even people who are powerful enough to defeat them.
I guess any of the categories of tyrants are likely to have lots of means to defend themselves.
Yes, because the tyrant who is not personally very strong but has a strong army, yes, it's true that if you defeat them, someone else from the army might take over.
They're not thinking about it that way.
But first of all, other people from the army who want to take over, that's a plus. Second of all, the people who you're oppressing might just want to get rid of you because they hate you. And they might think maybe your army won't. Maybe it'll fall apart. Maybe they needed you.
Yeah, so what means do they use? You know, and you were talking about sort of like the bound servitors, the idea of like, you know, yes, I have guardian constructs or like magically tied to me summoned creatures or things like that like physically cannot act against me.
Yes. Because, as I mentioned earlier, because they've seen how power could so easily shift to them, tyrants tend to be insecure about their power, even though they act with, like, overblown confidence of some kind of a strong man or something where they're just like, I can do whatever. They know that things can shift, and so they tend to be a little bit paranoid when it comes to putting up precautions and who they can trust. Even if they're one who's a tyrant who's popular, they tend to just be very watching and be like, oh, wait, I went from 90% to 86%. But they'll always just say, everyone likes me. But inside, many tyrants are just calculating, wondering if something's going wrong, and trying to stop or crush anything.
And they're going to be keeping a very close eye on any sort of resistance building.
To them, yes.
As well as anyone who seems that they may be a powerful person who's gathering support in particular in that. So that's part of why they start to come into conflict with PCs. If the tyrant sees, you know, powerful high-level individuals or, you know, relatively high-level individuals moving around and doing things that may threaten their base. You know, PCs by their definition are characters that are involved in these consequential heroic actions and the kinds that could gather people to their cause or change the way that people think, transform the world. So they are people that are going to come to the attention of tyrants.
That's right. So there's a few other types of tyrants. There are tyrants who have seized control because of the fact that they have the support of various factions within the country that are not religion and are not the military, that generally political tyrants.
Mhm.
These types of tyrants basically can gain power in a way that is much like similar to the ones in democracies who get voted in. In non-democracies, or even republics where some group of representatives are the ones selecting the leader, they basically have enough political factions under their thumb that they get installed as the tyrant. And then at that point, they create a system of leadership where they have absolute power, which may involve getting rid of opposition and giving a lot of rewards that they promised to the people who supported them. Maybe they actually get rid of the people who supported them because they're now too dangerous to their power.
Mhm.
And
Or maybe they do that in a staged way, where first they get rid of the opposition, and then they later get rid of some of the people who supported them who are not loyal enough.
That's right. Where they slowly purge off people that everyone can agree is okay-ish, and then until they eventually come for everybody who had any kind of chance to stop them.
Yes.
So that's a kind of Joseph Stalin style, like, erasing the people from the pictures around him that you could see in these. Any type of tyrant might do that, but the political tyrants are like more likely to come at it from that direction.
Yes, because they have to worry about the other factions, since it was working with the factions that got them power in the first place.
That's right. And while there are some tyrants who come to power because of their money, economic tyrants, those tend to become one of the other types of tyrants in practice because the money did not directly give them their tyranny. They used it to buy
the support of...
buy an army or make people like them by giving them money. Like make the populace like them and vote them in by giving them money. Make these factions like them by giving them money. They turn the money into another more direct form of power to becoming a tyrant.
Yes.
So you want to get a sense about not only how the tyrant's origin, which we've now I think covered in detail, like many of the different types of tyrants, but also what the tyrant's personality traits are beyond the kind of stereotypical of being sort of megalomaniacs who also still often feel somewhat insecure and want to overcompensate in certain ways about that.
So what do they have their country punish, and what do they have it praise and reward?
That's right. And another way to think about what they praise and reward and what they like is that ultimately, although they show this tyrannical facade that is strong always and is constantly fighting and may even seem like an inhuman monster to their enemies or to people who rebel against them, ultimately the tyrant is a person and they have things that they like. Like they might like watching a certain type of play or sports. Like they have something that they do for their leisure that humanizes them in a way that they might not want people to see them as being human. They might want to be seen as being above that and being inviolable person.
I mean, it also is possible in a fantasy game that they're literally not human and that they are like,
I am a construct tyrant.
Or that they're like an undead monstrosity like the Whispering Tyrant or whatever, and it's like, well, they don't necessarily have all these things, but they're still going to have like other, unless they're like literally I am a construct tyrant that doesn't, they're probably going to have, emotions and preferences.
Even a lich has their obsessions.
Yes, even a lich has their obsessions, yes.
But they might be a Tyrannosaurus Rex tyrant.
T-Rex tyrant, yes.
Yes. A tyrant lizard tyrant.
Yes.
And then they want food. So
there you go.
And I mean, a tyrant could be a foodie. You could have a tyrant who is a foodie and goes to like these like niche food places and is the ultimate, it's not the secret shopper. What do you call the person who is like secretly going to the to the restaurant to
I don't
try
know.
the
It's pretty
food.
similar to Secret Shopper.
It's like
That's
the Secret
review-
Shopper,
yeah,
but
like the
it's
reviewers
the
who don't
reviewer.
advertise the fact
They
that
don't
reviewers are-
advertise
yeah.
the reviewers there, and then they were secretly a reviewer. But imagine if it's the tyrant, and they
Yeah.
might execute your entire staff if they don't like the food.
Oh my gosh.
Secretly, or they might be like, "Surprise! I was the tyrant. This place is great. I am now in a mandate that everyone who comes to this town must go to this restaurant at least once
Yes.
because it's the best restaurant I've ever been to." Also, here's a bag containing 1,000 gold. Oh, I guess the severed head of the guy with the gold is still in the bag. You can have that too for free.
Yup.
Yep.
So that's like an example of one of the things that I wanted to get into is like, what are the cases where the PCs are going to come in contact with the tyrant? So this is one of those sort of like surprise encounters where they're not like in their usual role as like, I am sitting upon my throne, but they are instead going around among and investigating things. That can be very effective to just be like, oh my gosh, they're there. What am I gonna do? You can also have them come into contact with the tyrant from, you know, sort of the stereotypical, like, they're overthrowing the tyrant and now they've made it to the tyrant's place. You can have them interact with the tyrant because of the sort of paranoia / you know, in some cases, justified need to protect themselves from PCs and others who are opposing them. Having the tyrant's voice come in a case where the tyrants themselves isn't physically there, like having, you know, having letters or pre-recorded messages or things like that are taunting the PCs as a way to give you a chance to roleplay them when they're not literally physically there.
Right. And you want to think about the tyrant's like personality when it comes to the way that they talk or write things. You could have one like Barzillai Thrun, who's kind of a brooding introvert who locks himself up writing decrees, and who even like Hell Knights and other level people hate him, and he's just been hated by everybody. But like a lot of tyrants have some element of charisma to them. Even like the example I gave with the restaurant and the bag with the severed head, and it like has a certain sense of humor to it, even though you might also be horrified by that happening. And so like many or even most tyrants have some level of charisma or personality that draws people to them.
Yeah. And so you'll also likely to see things like grand speeches and things like that where they make performances for the people. And you have like all of these large, big scale things like festivals or speeches, often mandatory for you to attend.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you'll have those kinds of things too. Or you might have a case where, you know, the PCs are called to an audience with the tyrant, and the tyrant's not like directly opposing the PCs right away, but the tyrant's trying to get the PCs to do something for them, and there's the sense of like, yeah, you can't really say no, at least not in front of the tyrant. So are you gonna like do the thing, or are you going to fake doing the thing, or are you gonna run off to another country? Like, what are you gonna do here?
That's right.
So yeah, there's all sorts of possibilities there, but generally, like with any time that you're role playing the tyrant, there's going to be sort of that backdrop of the menace of their power. Until you get to the point where the PCs are, you know, there are actually the weak point, and then you can consider, you know, if the PCs overthrow the tyrant, you know, what happens when the tyrant is being defeated? Do they like refuse to conceive of the very idea that they could possibly lose?
Inconceivable.
Yes. Do they then like, you know, reveal other parts of their personality that have been kept hidden at that point? Do they try to make other kinds of appeals to maintain power?
Yeah. Or maybe they just break down. You can have a breakdown like Azula in Avatar: The Last Airbender, or just have like this one personality that the tyrant has, maybe where they project strength. They seem like they're unfazed by anything, but then once things start crumbling, they just reveal their desperate anxieties and just have a breakdown.
Yeah.
Something like that can easily happen to a tyrant who is keeping everything as a house of cards that begins to fall. And seeing that personality shift, seeing what happens when things go from cruising through success into failure, and how that changes the tyrant, can also give the players a better sense about the emotional depth of that character and of the fact that
who are they behind? What parts of themselves are hidden behind that mask?
Yes.
That they keep up for the public face.
Exactly. So I think I covered all the different types of tyrants that I was researching ahead of the show and talked about role-playing them.
Yeah.
Do you have any other tyrannical tips?
No, I think we're good.
All right. I just now realized maybe you should have worn your Abigail through and
you're right.
crown for
I
this,
totally should have worn
she's a tyrant and then been role-played as a tyrant.
That's true.
What would Abigail Thrun say about role-playing as tyrants? That can be our last
Let's see. What would Abigail Thrun say is role-playing as tyrants?
Yes, you don't need to have the crown for this.
That's true. I think she would probably think that if you needed an episode to tell you how to be a tyrant, then you don't have.
Abigail Thrun.
If you need to watch a scrying sensor to learn how to rule, that you are too weak to understand. A tyrant claims the true mandate of their power and understands that they are meant to rule.
There you go. Because Abigail Thrun became a tyrant by murdering her own relatives until she was the first in line. So it was not just by being an inherited tyrant. I guess inherited tyrants are a little bit different because they may or may not have their parents' same power base or method to authority, and they may or may not be as good at keeping it. Usually not.
And there's a mention of another interesting idea there, the unknowing child tyrant. They think everyone is their friend, but really everyone is just terrified to say no.
That reminds me of an episode of the Twilight Zone where like there's this little kid and just everybody is terrified of this bratty little kid. And they are implied to have like this power to just like do something awful to anybody who doesn't fulfill their every whim. So yeah, exactly. You can definitely have the unknowing child tyrant.
Or the tyrant who doesn't realize
even if they're not a child.
Yeah. Someone who doesn't realize that they're actually a tyrant because of a certain power that they have.
Yep. Or they think everybody does support them and that just like any vote against them really, really is actually a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many different ways that you can have a deluded tyrant like that. All right, so let's say goodbye to YouTube and then do our outro and see our vote. Bye, YouTube. See you next time.
Bye!